كيتور على الفراني معروف هو بس لا.
اهلا وسهلا اهلا وسهلا.
صباح الخير. صباح الخير. صباح الخير. والله كيف حالك لسه؟ زمان عنك. صباح الخير. تفضل. كيف حالك؟ السلام عليكم.
أنا من كندا أكثر. من كندا. جامعة تورونتو من منطقة تورونتو. لا لندن أونتاريو. لندن أونتاريو هيك تقريبا شي ساعتين من كندا من تورونتو لاتجاه وينزر. ذيك المرة كان عندنا كمان هون عزمنا السفارة الكندية. كان عندنا ثقافي تبع
Please enjoy all the accreditation. Please.
Really? That's something. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this is Dr. Khan, President Assistant.
Nice to meet you.
Me too.
Oh, excellent. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Among the top universities. Yeah. And we're really pleased to have him here today with us. And as you know, we are putting a lot of efforts in regards to teaching and learning. This is the president of the university, Dr. William.
Thank you.
How are you? You're welcome.
Nice to meet you.
So كيفك؟ الله يسلمك. You're welcome. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
The kindergarten to PhD.
Oh wow.
For the academic and for the TVET. For TVET. Training and vocational teaching and training.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's ambitious.
Exactly. For both. For both.
Competencies. Yes.
Here's the right guy to talk.
That's right. Right. Right.
That's good.
This is why I said that the main thing that we should focus on learning outcomes. That has three main items. Knowledge, skills,
And competencies.
and exactly.
Excellent.
And this will facilitate the employability of our graduates,
Yes, that's right.
even outside Jordan.
Yes.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد عليه الصلاة والسلام. أما بعد، بداية أود أن أعرف على نفسي. أنا عليان القرناوي المستشار التنفيذي لمجلس هيئة المديرين في جامعة عمان الأهلية، ونيابة عن رئيس هيئة المديرين وأعضاء مجلس إدارة الجامعة نرحب بالأستاذ الدكتور بشير الزعبي رئيس هيئة اعتماد مؤسسات التعليم العالي. أهلا وسهلا فيك. الأخوة المؤسسين المدارس، رئيس الجامعة، نواب رئيس الجامعة والعمداء، أعضاء الهيئة التدريسية، الحضور الكريم، كما وأيضا نرحب بضيفنا الكريم الأستاذ الدكتور ويليام راندو المدير التنفيذي لمركز التعليم والتعلم في جامعة شيكاغو. أهلا وسهلا فيك. You understand that. أهلا وسهلا فيك. طبعا نحن على الأبواب من شهر رمضان الكريم، وننتهز هذه الفرصة ونقول للجميع كل عام وأنتم بخير، وإن شاء الله ربنا يعيدنا جميعا على عيد الخير واليوم المباركات. زي ما بتعرفوا سأتحدث شوي باللغة العربية وبعدها سنتحول للغة الإنجليزية لأنه معنا ضيف ومحاضرات اليوم بتكون باللغة الإنجليزية. جامعة عمان الأهلية هي من الجامعات الرائدة في المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية، ونحن سعداء أن نكون جزء من هذه المؤسسة. نحن نعمل الصراحة طبعا بتوجيه من رئيس هيئة المديرين وإدارة الجامعة على التطوير. دائما أنا أؤمن وأقول بشكل واضح We are good but we are not great. نحن جيدين بس احنا مش ممتازين. لدينا في جامعة عمان الأهلية الكثير ما نفتخر به، ولكن دائما زي ما بيقول رئيس الجامعة نسعى أن نكون أفضل. ففي الواقع منذ عدة أشهر بدأنا نشتغل على خطة استراتيجية كتكملة للخطة الموجودة لتحسين الأوضاع، ومنها طبعا لجنة البحث العلمي، ونأمل إن شاء الله بعد عيد رمضان على خير إن يكون كمان عندنا ما يسمى Research Day زي ما عندنا اليوم Teaching Day. في الأشهر الأخيرة قمنا عدة لجان اللي هي لجنة التعليم والتعلم اللي برأسها الدكتور حسام كوكاش، اللي فيما بعد سيعرض لنا ما قاموا به منذ عدة أشهر ودرسوا هذه الأمور، وشاركنا أعضاء الهيئة التدريسية في هذا المسار. في عندنا أيضا لجنة البحث العلمي اللي فيما بعد سنتطرق لها باختصار، ولدينا أيضا لجان أخرى مختلفة زي الشؤون الأكاديمية العالمية الدولية. وعندما نتحدث عن International Academic Affairs لدينا خطة واضحة جدا، وطبعا الهدف تبعنا هو أن نبني علاقات أكاديمية مع مؤسسات عالمية في الولايات المتحدة، في كندا، في بريطانيا. منذ يومين رجعت من كوينز يونيفرسيتي وتفاجأت بالكم الهائل من طلابنا الأردنيين اللي موجودين وبيعملوا دكتوراه في كوينز يونيفرسيتي، فكنت أنا الصراحة سعيد جدا وفخور إني أنتمي إلى هذه المؤسسات الأردنية والمؤسسة الأردنية والمملكة الأردنية الهاشمية. فالمسار تبعنا زي ما بتعرفوا بناء أكثر اتفاقيات علمية مع المؤسسات الأكاديمية عالميا، لأنه ما بينفع، وطبعا أكيد أخونا وعزيزنا الدكتور زعب يوافق معي في هاي، إن بس نلعب على الدوري المحلي، حان الوقت إن نلعب عالميا. فبالتالي نجحنا في المدة الأخيرة إن يكون في عندنا اتفاقيات مع عدة جامعات، من بينها وأنا بفتخر بهاي الاتفاقية UBC University of British Columbia which considered one of the top universities in the world. أنا دائما بؤمن وبقول العب مع الأسود، العب مع الأسود حتى لو أنا في الآخر بطلع فيها بهذه الدرجة. فهاي جانب مهم جدا. طبعا كان لدينا كمان لجنة المؤتمرات اللي تشرف على المؤتمرات، لدينا أيضا لجنة المشاركة المجتمعية اللي كان أيضا لنا لقاء قبل عدة أيام. واليوم طبعا لدينا لجنة التعليم والتعلم، وهي لجنة مهمة جدا. هاي اللجنة عملت منذ 6-7 شهور على لقاءات مع أعضاء الهيئة التدريسية، درست ايش الامكانيات الموجوده، وبالتالي يعني هذا قرار نهائي طبعا عطوفه الدكتور ماهر احمد الحوراني رئيس هيئه المديرين في جامعه ايمن الاليه، وطبعا بالتنسيق مع اداره الجامعه نحن قررنا واتخذ القرار انه اقامه مركز التعليم والتعلم في جامعه عمان الاهليه، الذي طبعا الدكتور بشير اكيد حيصلح لي اذا في اخطاء هون، حيكون الاول من نوعه في المملكه الاردنيه بالطريقه اللي احنا بدنا نقترحها. وفيما بعد الدكتور حسام سيعرض لنا هذا البرنامج، هذا المركز، لانه في نهايه المطاف احنا بدنا نوصل لنقطه ان طريقه التدريس تختلف. طريقه التدريس بدها تكون طبعا بشكل او باخر. طريقه التدريس تبعنا بهمنا جدا انه ندرس بشكل اخر. حدثت انا صديقنا وعزيزنا الدكتور بشير الزعبي قبل ما نفتتح اللقاء انه في كثير من الشغلات اللي احنا بحاجه انه نطورها، وفي طبعا برامج، ويا ريت لو انك تتشرف وتحكي لنا دقيقتين 3 من وقتك، وانا عارف ان وقتك ضيق شويه كمان على الخطه اللي اقترحتوها، بس بعد اذنك بدي احكي شوي باللغه الانجليزيه لضيفنا وطبعا ضيفنا. So I'm really very pleased to be here today. I just say that in the last several months we just launched what's called strategic plan, and the strategic plan we're going to look at the teaching and learning framework, which is I think it's a very crucial to the development of any academic institutions, and we are very pleased today to have with us our guest speaker, which later on we'll introduce him, but he's an executive director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Chicago, and previously he established one of the great centers to the great university University. He established a center and he runs this center for 15 years at University of Yale. And I think everybody knows what is the quality of University of Yale. So as you can see today, we're really trying to shoot high, if I may use my words, to bring the best people here to be with us. So AU leading or going to a different direction. The direction of excellence, the direction of make us unique. What is make us unique? We have to read the map. I'm here as an executive consultant, bringing Canada to here, look at the world, and bring the best of the best in order to lead AU to a better future. We always, and as I said before, we are always good, but we are not great. From great to good, there's a way to go. There's a way to go. And I do believe that we at AU inspire, develop, and apply. Inspire our students by teaching, and our teaching should be an excellent. We can't use these days the tools, the technology of the 20th century to teach the 21st century. No, we can't do that. World has been changed. There's a lot of change in the world, and we have to adjust ourselves in order to address the changing needs, the changing world. And AU, we are there, we are reading the map, and we're trying to address these issues on advance. So, we do believe that recruiting students and faculty commit to excellence in teaching and learning, individuals, we are about to make our students, to provide our students with a different style of exploring, investigating, critical thinking. I don't want to teach just to memorize things. It's fast from the wall. We are, and I think William and I, we agree with that, and if you recall, back then when I presented the strategic plan, we at AU teaching our students how to think, not what to think. We are teaching our students to think globally, but to act locally. This is our approach, this is our strategies, the way we would like to see our students to think different, to explore, to investigate, not just to memorize things and go, and a day after they forgot. This is a different style. And the President and I, a few months ago, we talked about this. And I think we are in the right direction. So with no further ado, we will have the whole day together. I would really like to call on here to the stage Dr. Bashir Savik to say a few words. Please, the stage is yours, sir.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين. أنا حقيقة ما كنت يعني ما كان مبرمج إني ألقي كلمة، ولكن طبيعة الموضوع خلتني إني أتكلم يعني بعض الأشياء حول عملية التعليم والتعلم. بداية أود أن أشكر جامعة عمان الأهلية التي ممثلة برئيسها عضو الأستاذ الدكتور صادق حامد، وهيئة المديرين وأعضاء الهيئة التدريسية والعاملين في الجامعة على هذه الدعوة الكريمة لرعاية هذا الحفل. وهذا حقيقة من أهم المواضيع اللي احنا بنهتم بها. Professor William Rando, you are welcome, and excuse me to talk in Arabic about what we have already talked about the National Qualification Framework, and I'm looking forward to meeting you and to have the opportunity to see you within the next few days. احنا اخواننا بالنسبه لي هذا الموضوع حقيقه دائما كنا نتكلم عن العمليه التعليميه. الان توجه هو العمليه التعليميه والتعلميه. وسابقا كنا ما نهتم بالطالب كمحور للعمليه التعليميه، كنا نقول المدرس هو محور العمليه التعليميه. انا بدي ايضا العمليه التعلميه. learning not only teaching. الآن في عندي مخرجات تعليم وفي عندي نتاجات تعلم. مخرجات التعليم للعملية التعليمية، نتاجات التعلم للعملية التعلمية، وأنتم اعرفوني بهذا الشيء وانا بتعلم منكم. لا بيوم الخميس مجلس الاعيان اقر، وهي اخر مرحله في مجلس الامه اللي اقر تعديلات على قانون هيئه اعتماد مؤسسات التعليم العالي، وهي انه اعطوا الهيئه صلاحيه وضع اطار وطني للمؤهلات National Qualification Framework. طيب ليش هذا الاطار؟ وانا ارجو انه الايام القادمه ان شاء الله انه نزور الجامعات ونعطي محاضره او لقاء معكم حول هذا الموضوع. National Qualification Framework. قسمنا كل الإطار إلى 10 مستويات. كندرجارتن مستوى اللي هو ما قبل المدرسة، الصف الثالث أو الرابع، الصف العاشر أو التاسع، توجيهي، دبلوم فني، دبلوم متوسط، بكالوريوس، دبلوم عالي، ماجستير، دكتوراه. وما يقابل ذلك في التعليم والتدريب المهني أيضا. في كل ليفل، في كل مستوى في عندي 3 عناصر رئيسية 3 main items or components: المعرفة والخبرة والكفاءة، knowledge وسكيل وكومبتنسي. هذا اللي بدنا نركز عليه، بحيث أي طالب بكالوريوس فيزياء، بكالوريوس كيمياء، بكالوريوس حقوق في جامعة موتا، في التكنولوجيا، في اليرموك، في الهاشمي، في أعمال الآلية، في فيلادلفيا، البتراء، يأخذ نفس هذه الكومبوننتس بيسهل الانتقال بين جامعات. أيضا الجامعة تأخذ شهادة من هيئة الاعتماد إنه هذا التخصص، هذه المعرفة والمهارة والكفاية اللي فيه. هذا بيساعد خريجينا على التوظيف خارج الدولة، يعترفوا بمؤهلاتنا. دول الخليج سابقتنا بكثير. ذيك مرة بقول معالي وزير التعليم، بقول له والله احنا متأخرين شوي في هذا الموضوع. قال لي وين متأخرين؟ احنا بقول لك ب 20 25 سنة وكان يدرس في عمان، بقول له عمان جابوا خبراء بريطانيين لوضع الإطار الوطني للمؤهلات قبل 20 25 سنة. وانا بعد الان دول الخليج عندهم موجود ناشر كواليفيكيشن فريمورك. زرت دبلن قبل 2 سنين، موجود في هيئه ضمان الجوده هناك واشتغلوا عليه من زمان. طب احنا ليش لحد الان للاسف الشديد ما عملنا شيء؟ لذلك انا يعني الموضوع فيه تفصيل اكثر حول هذا الموضوع، خاصه احنا الان عندنا عدد كبير ومتنوع من المؤهلات. اخواننا عندنا الان 2,000,000 طالب على مقاعد الدراسه في المدارس، 2,000,000. عندي 280 طالب في الجامعات، 21,000 طالب و500 في كليات المجتمع، 13,500 طالب في مراكز التدريب اللي تابعه لمؤسسه التدريب المهني. تحكي عن 2,315,000 طالب وطالبه ومتدرب في هذه المؤسسات. هذول كلهم راح ياخذوا مؤهلات. من الذي يضبط هذه المؤهلات؟ ومن يضمن انه في هذه المؤهلات راح يكون المعرفه والخبره والمهاره والكفايه؟ احنا هذا اللي بدنا اياه وهذا اللي بدنا نشتغل. انا اسف اطلت عليكم مره اخرى، شكرا كثير لكم، بارك الله فيكم، وانا سعيد جدا برعايه هذا الحفل، وهذا حقيقه ارجو انكم تهتموا فيه. واشكر جامعه عمان الاهليه انها بدات في هذه المبادره مركز التعليم والتعلم، حتى انه فعلا انه نبين للناس انه احنا بنهتم بنتاجات التعلم قبل ما نصمم الخطه الدراسيه لطلابنا. وشكرا. انا مضطر اطلع الساعه 10 لانه في نشاط ثاني 10:30.
We need you for 5 minutes and then you will start your presentation because Dr. Safi is leaving. Just to give an overview and then you will start your presentation. So please. 5 minutes, yes.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview, a 5-minute overview of what we're going to do today. The main thrust of what I want to talk about and what I'm going to present has to do with the fact that in the last 20 to 30 years, there has been an explosion of new information and new evidence and new data that we can now use to think about our teaching. We've always had a lot of good information about teaching that came from the people before us. But the great news is that a lot of those strategies for how to help students learn have now been studied, and we have evidence to support the kinds of things that we're trying to do. So what I'm going to talk about today, and what I'm going to ask you to think about today, is how some of these new strategies can help us reach students more effectively. At the cornerstone of what I'm going to talk about is a group of evidence that tells us how students learn. We all have implicit theories about how people learn, and those theories are useful. But in the last 40 years, we now actually know more than we ever have before about how people actually learn. And the work that I and my colleagues have been doing for the last 20 years has been taking that information about how people learn and bringing it to faculty members like yourselves so that you can use it to build classes that actually get students where you want to go. So that is the overview of what I'm going to talk about, primarily thinking about how students learn. And can we, I pose it as a question, can we use this information about how people learn to help us teach better? It's an open question, but I'm going to make my case. And then at the end, I will say, I want to talk about, in the latter part of my talk, I want to talk about the role of a center for teaching, like the kind that I run in Chicago and that I used to run at Yale. What does that mean for you as faculty members? How might you be able to access this center to become the teacher that you want to be, so that your students actually leave your classes able to do the things that you want them to do? So that's what we're going to do today, and I look forward to doing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. William, and I think we all agree, and thanks to Dr. Bashir Zerbi for his excellent comments and remarks. And we at AAU looking forward to work with you more and to host you more here and see you as part of AAU's member. Thank you very much. So now we would like to move to the second speaker. We have here Dr. Sam Kokash. He will present the Teaching and Learning Committee results, which they developed. Okay. So we just started, guys. Yes, okay. So let's take, please, 5 minutes break, and join me one more time to thank Dr. Bashir Zerbi for joining us. Thank you very much. So please, 5 minutes break, and then we'll start again. Okay, so one more time. We'll continue our presentation now. The agenda for today. Now we will have Dr. Hassan will present the findings of his work and the teamwork. He chaired this committee for 6-7 months already, and they collected data, and they're gonna introduce the strategic plan for teaching and learning and how we're going to see the center. And as you notice, we heard from our speaker, Dr. Zabi, that the center is crucial, is essential for teaching at any universities in the world. Later on, after the presentation of Dr. Hussam and his team, I don't know, there's a team, one of them is Ala. He's a troublemaker, but he's okay. He's there. So he helped, and I think Dr. Hussam will say a few words about the committee and the work of the committee. And in this case, I know before I introduce Hussam and before I introduce Dr. William, I really would like to take the opportunity to thank a lot of people who helped us to make this event to pass. First of all, you know, the President's office, they were very helpful, collaborative. My team in my office, Iyad, Zaida, and the new lady, what's her name? I forgot her name. Serena, and the public relation, and Dr. Khalid, Hussa, everybody, really. You all were very helpful. And excuse me if I forgot somebody, but all of you were very helpful. And again, thanks for understanding, for a little bit of confusion. Yesterday we said it's 10, and today we started 9:30, but that's because our speaker, Dr. Zabi, he managed to do it in this time. So thank you very much. And one more time, Ramadan Kareem, kul aam antum khair. Now, with no further ado, I would like to call upon Dr. Hussam Kokash to present about 25 to 30 minutes the strategic plan, and then we'll move to a word to William. So, Hussam, please, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you, and I'm very pleased to meet with Dr. Bashir Zawi, the President of National Committee for Accreditation and Academic Assessment. I'd like to welcome our President, Vice President, our deans, directors, chairmen, our AU community and the schools, principals. So I'd like to thank you, really thank you to joining us on this special day, talking about the TLC of AAU, or Teaching and Learning Center. At the beginning, I need just to technically talking about the teaching and learning as a process. Explaining why we came up with the idea of Teaching and Learning Center, the necessity of teaching and learning at a center or administrative unit in Al Ahliya University. So, first of all, I need to mention why the old philosophy of teaching doesn't work. So, why traditional way of teaching doesn't work. As you know, traditional ways of teaching becomes insufficient, inefficient, and invalid for the following reasons. When instructors enter their classes, they don't do more than explaining theories and transferring knowledge to their students. So students are just listening impassively to their instructors, and no skills are developed there in the classroom. So we can summarize this by saying that it's one-way communication. Also, students, even they memorize the knowledge or part of the knowledge gained in the classroom, they cannot deploy or translate what they learn in class into specific activities in their field of specialization. Also, teacher deliver theories according to their understanding, and this is one of the unfortunately, ineffective problems that we have, because when teachers explaining, so we cannot understand that all professors will explain or will deliver the knowledge in the same way for all students. Take into consideration that students are from different levels, or if you have like 60 or 70 students in the classroom, so we cannot expect that all of them will be at the same level. And this is a challenge for instructors. This will dramatically impacting the ability of instructors to provide or to give what they need to do in classroom. Also, students may lose great part of the required knowledge according to the teacher-centered approach, which is the old philosophy of teaching. Similarly, teacher-centered approach, or the old philosophy or traditional ways of teaching, may provide some knowledge to students, but for sure, there is no development of skills. We remember 5 minutes or 10 minutes before, Dr. Bashir Zawi, Professor Bashir, talked about the importance of developing skills of our students from different levels or at different levels. So, what's the solution? Nowadays, universities talking about student-centered approach. Student-centered approach will focusing on the student as the main component and participant of the teaching and learning process. So we have, as you know, all of you, different benefits of the student-centered approach. First of all, when the instructors or lecturers enter their classes, they will focus on their interactivity. So the classroom will be like a flipped classroom. So one of the methods, or technically talking about teaching and learning, one of the most appreciated methods of teaching nowadays is the flipped classroom, where the students will do great part of learning and the role of the teacher will be as facilitator, just to correcting them toward the right direction. So that's why the classroom will be interactive session. There is a communication or two ways communication where the students will be highly engaged with the knowledge, with the theories, with their professors, and they will think in such a way to go farther than to acquire knowledge. How to deploy, how to implement, how to apply their knowledge in field. So this will create more concentration from students, from the side of students. And this will link the theory to practice, by which we can maximize the skills or required skills for the labor market. Because nowadays we need to also to look behind the requirements of the labor market in order to identify what skills do we need to develop and how can we best providing or creating such skills in our students. And also we can summarize that the student learning outcomes or student-centered approach by seeing its great experience for both, for instructors and for the students. So, according to this approach, if it is important to identify what should students learn, by then it's more important to determine how will they learn. So we are not focusing just on the theories or what do we need to provide students as a piece of knowledge, but we will go one step more to identify the process or to decide on the process how can we provide the knowledge or required knowledge. Okay, so nowadays, in order to solve such problem in teaching and learning and to move from the traditional way of teaching toward the new and modern pedagogies, let's say, we are talking about the teaching and learning centers. Good reputable institutions worldwide or worldwide recognized, focusing on the concept of TLC or teaching and learning centers with variation. I mean by variation, not all universities aiming to achieve specific objectives or the same objectives in different ways. This is to say also that there is a discrepancy in universities or variation in universities in adopting the concept of teaching and learning. So this discrepancy or variation among universities is due to the complexity of the main components of the concept of teaching and learning. This is to say that not all universities aiming to achieve the same objective always in terms of learning outcomes or in terms of adapting themselves or their resources. So that's why some universities focusing or concentrating on the main resources, which is vary for teaching and learning for sure, as you know, and also they are similar in such a way to adopt the teaching and learning center in one term, which is to have a comprehensive, huge system of teaching and learning, regardless of the details that refers or making reference to how to adopt the concept. So the appearance of teaching and learning center is a must nowadays for all universities, because it's like an administrative unit by which we can provide a lot of support or enhancement of the process or teaching and learning process. So, the challenge for Al Ahliya Amman University was based on how to create effective learning outcomes according to international standards. So, when we started as a committee to work on the concept of teaching and learning, we asked ourselves different questions about our university to determine whether we have such importance for creating a center or establishing a center, or we can manage the process in another way. So, first of all, we ask ourselves different questions like, do students have ability to effectively manage the self-learning process? Because self-learning process nowadays, according to some important publications or research, demonstrate that the self-learning is like double-edged sword case, or what we call like a dangerous case if you are not managing the process effectively. Then we asked ourselves what students must learn, how, when, and where. Are all faculty members in university, colleges, even in the same department, are working in harmony in terms of learning outcomes, in terms of their plan of delivering the required knowledge, developing skills to students? Are all faculty members working in the same way in terms also more than the learning outcomes, in terms of achieving what the labor market is looking for from the university or searching out, and also how to build the required knowledge and to develop the students' various skills step-wise or step by step in order to go in such a way according to a complete comprehensive plan of teaching and learning in order to say, yes, we have such skills have been developed by our university, and this will be like the value add, or at least the competitive advantage beside all other academic institutions. We ask ourselves also, do faculty members effectively measure the learning outcomes? Because I know that all academic programs in our university and our institution have learning outcomes, but I think we need to revise this process and to look behind what we already established in order to make it competent and to make it at higher standards or higher international standards. Also, if this, let's say, assessment of learning outcomes or achieving the learning outcomes institutional-wise happen in the right way and based on international quality standards, as well as what about the academic curriculum? Are curricula developed by the academic programs component or not? And what about the benchmarking that we did in that regard regarding the academic curriculum? I think we need continuously to review and update our curriculum, our curricula in general, and we need to focus on what we call learning outcomes to develop skills. Okay, so based on what we asked ourselves, different questions or many questions, based on what we gave as dedication during the last 7 months, the committee members proposed to establish a center, which we call AU TLC Center, Teaching and Learning Center of Amman Al Ahliya University, and this will be the first center in Jordan. So no one of the universities, neither public universities nor private ones, have such center. And we will establish the center, or the center will be one of the most important units in the university, because this will provide huge support for our university toward the success. So what's TLC Center? What's AU TLC Center? TLC is a strategic and necessary to contribute to the success of our reputable and respected university through providing several services and resources that encourage and support teaching excellence. To make it more clear, we need to review the mission statement of our university. So here I'm focusing on the main components of the Al Ahliya Amman University's mission. So the vision and mission of Al Ahliya Amman University declare the excellence in teaching and learning, So this is the main reason why, or explaining why do we need to establish such a center, and to occupy higher rank among local and regional universities, similarly to adopt the international standards to make AU preferred choice of students and to create academic environment that seeks excellence. So, from this exact point, the TLC will be the strategic unit that support the university and its colleges and academics to make a dramatic change toward more success through enhancing the quality of teaching and learning process. So, the center as an administrative unit. The committee proposed to our top management to look at the center, the hierarchy, to be in between the president's office and the academic unit. So the center will play 3 dramatic roles. The first role is advisory role for the top management or the president's office, and provide cooperation and collaboration to all academic colleges, administrative offices, deanships, as well as provide direct support and development in terms of learning outcomes, establishing good academic curricula, making good assessment, and prepare for implementing higher standards or international standards for academic programs. So we propose this structure for the center, and we will leave the decision for our top management. So what's the vision and mission of the center? The vision of the Teaching and Learning Center at Al-Ahli Amman University envisions to become an acknowledged, countrywide and qualified center recognized for innovative academic development. So from this point, the mission statement is to enforce high international standards to ensure the quality of teaching and learning, and to create an interactive learning experience through well-designed, comprehensive, innovative services that aim to continuously promote the culture of excellence and develop and support the AE community. So the values of the center. The center adopted the following values: excellence in teaching and learning, enthusiasm for continuous long life learning, interdisciplinary and diverse collaboration, because the center will have a role to make a dramatic change inside and outside the university as well. Passion for innovative trends in teaching and learning, flexibility and responsiveness in programming and decision making, professionalism and integrity, leadership and continuous support for teaching and learning. Yesterday I was talking with our honored guest, Professor William, and we focused on this important last value that the center must have, which is preparing leadership or training people to make all the community of the AU to have the leadership, or to carry them to have the leadership. What are the main goals of the center? The first goal is to establish teaching and learning quality framework, and as Professor Bashir Zobi said today, that the national equality framework based on 3 main dimensions are important. As you'll see, Al-Ahli Amman University will focus on 5 main dimensions, not just the 3 main dimensions, because when we are talking now about the learning outcomes, effective learning outcomes, we will focus on the most important 5 dimensions of any learning process recognized worldwide. So these 3 types of national equality framework that will be established for all Jordanian universities will be involved in our AU quality framework. So the first goal is to establish the quality framework, as I said, in Al-Ahli Amman University, and to help colleges and academic programs to implement the international standards of quality in teaching and learning. The second goal, goal number 2, to develop a proactive performance monitoring system of teaching and learning that helps academic leaders to identify problems early. We will not wait to something happen regarding teaching and learning to solve such problems. We will identify ahead of time such problems, or we need to prevent some problems to happen. Goal number 3 is to continuously support faculty, staff and students of AU to achieve their best. And goal number 4, to promote an academic excellence culture by giving the opportunity of professional development to all community members and to ensure the best use of available academic resources to effectively enhance the teaching and learning process. Good. So, what are the main areas of activities or work that the center will focus on? We have 6 main dimensions through the center. The first one and the most important dimension of the center is to establish quality framework of teaching and learning, what we call by then TLQF, Teaching and Learning Quality Framework for Amal Ahliya University. Another dimension is learning outcomes-based academic assessment. We will identify what learning outcomes we need to focus on and how to achieve success through achieving the learning outcomes and how to make a good assessment. The third dimension is to focus on our instructors, or what we call instructional development, and to develop our faculty members. Active learning methods and effective teaching strategies for sure must be developed in order to make success in the process itself, learning, teaching and learning, and to develop, as I said to you, all our community, AAU, with students together in parallel. Also, we will focus on the academic advising and student support, to provide student support, because we have always, that we have international institutions as well. They are suffering from some students with difficulties of learning, or they have low academic performance. So the center will be responsible mainly about how to come up with a strategy to be in place in order to solve such problem of students with some difficulties or academic difficulties maybe. Also, the center will support the Quality Assurance Center in the academic accreditation and quality assurance issues, or implementing standards related mainly to the teaching and learning. Okay, here you can see exactly what's the meaning of each dimension or area of responsibility of the center. The first area, as I said, quality framework of teaching and learning, TLQF. So here we are aiming to establish what we call AAU TLQF on learning domains, the main 5 domains, not 3 domains as the Ministry of Higher Education is looking, and to link the AAU TLQF to the vision and mission of our reputable institution to establish measurable institutional learning outcomes, college learning outcomes, and mapping all these things to what we call at the bottom of the let's say process, which is program learning outcomes based on the course learning outcomes. So from top to bottom, from bottom to top, we will talking the same language, let's say, and we will all participate in creating the success of our university in terms of teaching and learning. The second dimension is learning outcomes-based academic assessment. Here we are focusing on formulating and evaluating the learning outcomes. As I said to you earlier, that some of academic programs that we have in our typical university have learning outcomes, but I think it's time to review all what we have and to make it at international standards or verified according to such standards. Also, we are aiming through the learning outcomes-based assessment to identify quality measures of outcomes and to introduce something important for the assessment for sure, which is the KPIs or key performance indicators on teaching and learning, to help and review the academic program structure, to establish a comprehensive process of direct and indirect measures or assessment, because this concept of assessment is very important in order to disseminate roles or to identify what should we do in terms of making a right assessment directly or indirectly toward the learning and teaching. And the instructional development, here we are focusing on develop learning and teaching skills, because we need to ensure that all our colleagues entering their classes according to the highest standards, as I say, and all we are contributing to each other in order to determine the success of our university by achieving the success in learning outcomes or assessing the learning objectives. and to provide comprehensive training, workshops, seminars, symposia to faculty members on teaching and learning related topics. The fourth area of contribution from the center is the active learning methods and effective teaching strategies. To ensure the use of contemporary teaching methods and techniques in classroom, as I say to you nowadays, the universities worldwide are talking about the flipped classroom. Maybe we are not ready yet to such concept, but we need to prepare our classroom to get ready for any change in teaching and learning, to make the environment prepared well in order to deploy all these methods and strategies in teaching. To make sure the use of high quality material, the most updated resources, different resources, direct or indirect resources, and useful tools required for teaching and learning. Similarly, to help academic programs to deploy and perform effective teaching and learning strategies suitable to their field of specialization. The fifth dimension and the area of specialization of the Teaching and Learning Center, focusing on the academic advising and student support, as I said to you, to establish a comprehensive system for proactive academic advising, to follow up with students with low academic performance, or what we call in our university low GPA, through a mentoring system. Academic accreditation and quality assurance support is the last dimension, or the sixth dimension that we need to focus on, by working hand in hand with the quality assurance, as I said, in order to help in assurance of learning, to help the colleges, academic colleges, to perform internal and external benchmarking against to the reputable institutions and good practices and good programs, or academic programs worldwide recognized, and to help the academic programs to develop, review their curricular ability. Okay, so with more details, here you can see that we can focus on the aim of each area of specialization of the center. The first dimension is the quality of teaching. So we have different activities to focus on, like faculty orientation, faculty professional development, providing training to all members of AAU, the classroom observation to help and orientate in designing and developing the academic curricula and curriculum mapping, as I said to you, from bottom to top, from the CLOs, PLOs, college learning outcomes, and institutional learning outcomes, ILOs. So here we have objectives and we have responsibilities. The center is open to all, as an administrative unit, is open to all community members of AAU to participate, to provide support as well. So we are aiming to work hand in hand, all together, regardless of the college, academic college, or academic program. The aim is to provide success for our reputable institution, Al Ahliya Amman University. Second dimension is the quality of students' assessment, and here we need to adopt both direct and indirect measures. And this is very important in first instance in order to succeed the process, to identify what measures must be deployed in assessing the learning outcomes, or measuring the learning outcomes, and how can we train our community members, and how we can stepwise, let's say, implement the process one by one. Also, we need to review the student assessment documentation and reports provided by colleges and academic units. This will be the main aim of the center, in order to make sure that all academic departments are in the same track or in the same line. Similarly, we will help in assessing and evaluating the learning domains. Learning domains, as Dr. Bashir Zawi this morning focused on three important domains: knowledge, he mentioned knowledge, student skills, and communication, I think. So Al Ahliya Amman University will focus on the three important domains, plus other two, which is interpersonal skills, and for some academic programs, the cycle module. So mainly the quality framework of Al Ahliya Amman University will focus on five main dimensions, which are knowledge, cognitive skills, interpersonal skills, communication skills, and psychomotor for some programs, if it's applicable for them, for sure. Also, one of the most important parts of the quality framework that we need to work through the Teaching and Learning Center is the quality in using technology We know that we have the e-learning center, and they are doing great work, and we need to work with them or to support them to identify the required resources for teaching and learning. So here we are working hand in hand with different administrations, different offices in our university in order to create success. So in terms of learning resources, we need to monitor the process, we need to organize with inside and outside the university in order to make sure that our resources are updated. Also, we need to focus on the quality and academic support, mainly the student support, developing student skills, adopting a system of proactive academic advising. So the implementation or the strategic plan of the center. The center has a strategic plan of 5 years, from 2018 up to 2023. The first 2 years will be the first, or to implement the first phase, which is the initiation. This phase will last during 2 years, and also will involve the basic step design to produce immediate contribution, as well as longer-term program development to institutionalize the center. The second phase will be the institutionalization of the center, and another 2 years from among the 5 years of the strategic plan. This stage or this phase will involve the consolidation and expansion of comprehensive program of teaching and learning to have the success of all activities and to realize and to achieve all objectives of the center. The third phase will be the professionalism or professionalization of the center, and here the third phase will completely focusing on the program during the 5th year by measuring achievements and having regular, consistent and continuous approach. So we have 5 years to work from now, and we need to step by step all together to work on that center in order to achieve the objective of our university, to work hand in hand with other institutions and with other let's say offices and administrations, as I say. Inshallah, all the success will be for our university through these initiatives, like establishing TLC Center or other centers, and also with the old established oriented centers like quality assurance, like e-learning and other administrations. Thank you.
يعطيك العافية بالعربي. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation very much, even though I was part of this, because we know زي ما احنا شايفين انه الاعلان عن اقامه هذا المركز، وطبعا زي ما ذكر الدكتور حسام والدكتور بروفيسور الزعبي هو مهم جدا. وطبعا بتامل انه في مرحله معينه احنا في مرحله كتابه الريبورت او التقرير، وبهمنا جدا انه كمان نوزع هذا التقرير على جميع اعضاء الهيئه التدريسيه، طبعا فيما بعد ما يطلع عليه رئيس الجامعه واداره الجامعه. المرحله اللي احنا موجودين فيها زي ما ذكرنا سابقا وزي ما ذكر الاخوان، انه اقامه هذا المركز له دور مهم جدا على جميع المستويات. وطبعا حنسمع اكثر اليوم من الدكتور ويليام فيما بعد. ف حاليا طبعا شوي غير البرنامج تبعنا، بس تقريبا احنا موجودين we are doing fine with the time. So let me now, a really great honor for me today to participate in this workshop and to be called upon to introduce my friend, Professor William Randall. But before I introduce him, I really would want to say one more time, thanks to all of you for attending today. I really appreciate that. I know it's a Saturday. I know it's not easy to leave the family to be with us today, but it's for the sake of the university, for the sake of the country. We all join together, probably for a better future for our university. So William Randall, he's an executive director, Chicago Center for Teaching. Randall started his professional career teaching in the College of Arts and Sciences at Northwestern University in Boston. For the past 30 years, he has taught undergrad courses, developed centers for teaching and learning, and served in leadership positions in higher education and in organizations that advance teaching. He was the first full-time director of the Academy for Art and Teaching at Florida International University in Miami. And he was founding director of the Yale Teaching Center at Yale University, where he worked and taught for 15 years prior to coming to the University of Chicago. His research and writing covers a wide range of areas, including medical education, qualitative research methods, lecturing, group dynamics, teaching with image, and institutional strategies for the faculty and TA development. His publications include Our Practice is Shaped by Implicit Theories, Recommendation for Teaching Psychology, Design, Implementation, and Evaluation of an Innovative Autonomy course, and Learning from Students, case students in mid-semester feedback. Randall consult with colleges and universities throughout the country and around the world. He holds a BA in English from Boston College, an MA and PhD from Northwestern University. So with no further ado, please join me to welcome our guest speakers. Randall, please, the stage is yours.
So, I want to start by thanking Dr. Ali and his team, who have made this visit very warm and welcoming to me. This is my first time in Jordan, and it is an incredible honor for me to be here. We've been working for the past couple of days, but after today, or maybe after tomorrow, I've got a few days free, so I'm going to have an opportunity to see more of your country. So if anybody knows some spots that I should see while I'm here, feel free to come and talk to me on the break. I would appreciate that. So I'm not above getting some free travel advice from my participants. But for today, so far this morning we've been talking about teaching from sort of the 60,000 feet view, right? Broad goals and broad principles and concepts. And so I want to shift a little bit now, because the reality is that 90% of the time that I spend as a person who leads a center for teaching is not spent up here at the 60,000 level. It's spent here talking to teachers, and talking to teachers about what is it they're trying to do and how can I help. That's what a teaching center at its core does. A teaching center primarily does one thing: supports teachers and helps them do what they're here to do, which is reach students. If a teaching center is successful at doing that, all those 60,000 feet topics that we've been talking about will take care of themselves. That's my belief. That's how I work. That's what I do. That's what I've been doing for 30 years. Working with teachers. New teachers, teachers at mid-career, and teachers who've been teaching for 20 to 25 years who find themselves saying, I wonder if my students are getting what it is I really want them to get. It's not an easy thing to do. Teaching is incredibly difficult, and it becomes more difficult, I think, every day. as things change and expectations change and students change and professions change, to me this is what a teaching center does at its core. It helps faculty members do what they're trying to do. And that's what I want to do a little bit today. We don't have a lot of time, but we have some time, and I want to show you a little bit, maybe, of what a teaching center might do for you as teachers. So, my goals for this presentation are this, that by the end of this first session, I want to talk a little bit about backward design as a tool. And what I want for you is for you to have the opportunity to reflect on this concept and ask yourself, is this something that would be useful for me? The second goal I have is I want you to consider, and I mentioned this before, the question of evidence-based practice. I want to introduce some of the latest evidence that we have about teaching. And I ask you, would this be helpful for you? And I want by the end of this session for you to consider that. And lastly, we're going to take a look at some very specific principles of how people learn. And what I'd like by the end of the session is for you to be able to apply some of those principles to the teaching that you do every single day. So if you can achieve these things by the end of this first part, I will have succeeded in my goal. One last thing before I continue is I'm going to try, even though we're a pretty big group, to have this be somewhat conversational. So I'm going to be asking you some questions. I think everybody has a pad and something to write with. Does everybody have something to write with? Yes. So I will be, from time to time, I would like to get some feedback and to hear from you to make this presentation really worthwhile to everyone. So let's get to work. I'd like to start by asking you to do this for me. Think about the courses that you teach, or maybe think about a single course that you teach regularly. And I want you to think about that course and finish this sentence. Sometimes at the end of the term, I really wish that my students had gotten better at X. Finish that sentence. I know that when I was teaching, it seems like at the end of every term, when I read the papers or looked at the finals, I thought, I really wish my students had gotten better at X. So take 2 minutes and either think about it, and if you've got something to write with, finish that sentence. So everybody have something in mind or something written down. What I'd like for you to do now is I would like for you to turn to the person next to you. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't know them. If you don't know them, introduce yourself. And I would just like for you to share what each of you wrote. And as you do that, I want you to look at, are they similar? Are the kinds of things that you want your students to be better at similar, or are they very different? So I'll give you 3 minutes to do that. Turn to the person next to you and share what you wrote or what you were thinking about. Go.
استراليا عم تسليها مثلا قبل او بدها كانوا شويه ناضي بيعرف عربي منيح الصغيره كانت اشهر كانت تفكر كيف احكي عربي جربت العربي على اساس اللغه بتحكي منيح عربي هلا لغتها صعبه شوي بالعربي يعني مش زي بس تفهم
Okay, let's come back together. I was wondering if any of you would be willing to share what you were thinking about. If you would be willing to share some of the kinds of things that you wish students were better at the end of the term. Yes, over here. Oh, thank you so much for doing that. Oh, this is great. I didn't know we had that. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Wow, that's loud. Yeah, usually what students will get in my classes, it's more related to practical things.
Such as?
Like, oh yeah, my name is Hanadi Salami from Business School,
Great.
Management Information System Department. So usually, like for example, in my database classes, they don't master, for example, the process of normalization of a database. They focus more on the theoretical things and memorization.
Okay, so this is a common theme. Students have a bunch of facts in their heads, but what you've called practical things, they aren't as good at doing stuff. Thank you. Another. Yeah, oh, right over here, please. I think you're going to run a lot today, but that's... Thank you. And yes, please, your name and your department.
Yeah, Imran Salim, Network and Information Security Department.
Yes.
I focus always to my students how to seek the knowledge and to how to verify the knowledge, because the knowledge exists nowadays in the internet. They can find anything.
That's true.
But actually, it's mixed now. True and false knowledge exists. So I try to focus on how to find the best resources and how to verify the knowledge, and then how to improve the skills.
And what is it that you wish they were better at the end? This finding process? What is it that you, at the end of the term, that you wish they were better at?
Yeah, improve their skills in seeking the new knowledge.
Okay. So again, students not bad at acquiring knowledge, but you wish they had better skills at seeking knowledge, that they were better at asking questions. We have another hand right over here, right in the middle there. Thank you.
Dr. Hanan from the Faculty of Nursing.
Thank you.
Actually, I teach a subject which is health education. And I would like the students to be better at choosing a subject to a target group where they will be able to develop a lesson plan which they can address to that group with excellence.
Okay. So again, the challenge is students getting better at a process, making decisions, making choices, doing active kinds of things. Maybe one more, if we have one more right over here. Right over here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I am Professor Ali Hamzi, Faculty of Engineering, Electrical Department. In most courses which I teach, I give the students called term project. It means some assignment about certain topics. I had gotten better that the project belonging to the real world, but I could not make this for a couple of reasons. First, students are very weak. Not all, of course, about 90%. Very weak. And I hope that you know this fact. Second, they are because they are weak students, they are not so active. They make things so slowly and so on. So I have not the time to give them open-ended homework or projects.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So here again, the challenge is a general sense of, I wish my students were able to move further along in the educational process. I wish I were able to get them to a point where they could apply things in the real world. And in this case, the challenge is, but it's hard to get them from point A to point B. So everyone in this room had things that they would like to see their students have more of. And this process that we've just engaged in, the process that you've just engaged in, is a key process that we talk about in the design of learning, which is called backward design. And backward design, excuse me, is very simple. It simply says that we design classes not from the beginning, but from the end. We figure out what skills and abilities do we want our students to have. We have to think about this very carefully. And we break it down and we design the course starting with the ending capacities of the students, and we work backwards from there. We start at the end, backwards design. What do I want students to be able to do at the end? And what kinds of learning activities do I have to create in order to get students to that spot? 90% of the work that I do in my teaching center begins with this question. How do I want students, excuse me, how do I want students to be different by the end of my class? How do I want students to be different for having taken a class with me? Not for having taken any class, but for having taken a class with me. It is the key question. The reason I call this talk Question, Evidence, and Teaching is because this question is what drives really all of the work I do with teaching. Now, as some of you communicated to me, a lot of times this difference that we're trying to create in students has to do with developing skills, practical skills, abilities, organizational skills. And so what we ask faculty to do right on the syllabus is to express that goal by saying, by the end of this course, you will be able to X. It's a different approach to thinking about a syllabus than saying, in this term, we are going to cover these 8 topics. That's a teacher-centered approach. A student-centered approach is, by the time this course is over, you are going to be able to do these 6 things. And that is what drives that question, how do I want my students to be different, is what drives 90% of the work that I and most of my colleagues do. But the fact is, teaching is more than setting goals. When we think about using backward design, we start there. What do I want from my students? And we articulate clear, student-centered learning goals. That's step 1. But then, what we have to do is we have to figure out what kinds of teaching practices are going to get them from point A to point B. And then we have to figure out, how am I going to assess that learning goal that I set up? This is the model of design that we use. Backward design, looking at the goals, looking at the practices and the assessment. When all of those things line up, we call that constructive alignment. When I look at a syllabus and all of these things line up, the goals, the practices, the assessment, we consider that constructively aligned. And that's a lot of the work that I do, working with faculty on their syllabus to make them more aligned. But I also want to point something out, another term that I slipped into this slide in the last two boxes, and that term is evidence-based. Evidence-based practices and evidence-based assessment. This is something that I alluded to in my little preview. When we're looking at the kinds of activities that you plan for your students, there are a lot of really great ideas. I could survey this room and get tons of great teaching ideas. But the great news is that today we have enormous levels of evidence for the kinds of teaching activities that actually work. And that evidence-based level of activity is what I want to talk about now. And I want to talk about it starting with an example.
Professor.
Yes?
Give me 1 minute, please, to announce something.
Sure, please.
في حدا عنده جيب بيضة هون مسكر على بوابة الجامعة. هاي إذا ممكن معلش بنغلبك. شكرا.
Thank you. You're welcome. Okay. So let's, I want to talk a little bit about evidence-based instruction. And I want to just take a look at one example. This fellow that you see here is named Eric Mazur. He's a physicist. Do we have any people who teach physics in the audience here today? Hello, thank you. Do you know him? You ever heard of him?
I know another person.
Okay.
He was a director in Germany.
Got it. Well, this guy, Eric Mazur, is a physics professor at Harvard. And he'd been teaching physics for 30 years. Teaching introductory physics, teaching large classes in physics like this one. And guess what? Like some of you noticed about your own students, he noticed that his students, they weren't learning physics. They were learning a bunch of equations, they were learning a bunch of facts, but they weren't learning concepts. They weren't learning to think like a physicist. So he decided to do something about it. And what he invented, what he began to practice with, is a method called peer instruction. And I'm going to explain it to you now, because it's very simple, but very powerful. Basically what he does is he lectures about physics, and he'll lecture about a topic, gravity, or that's about all I know about physics, gravity, or motion or force, and he lectures for 15 minutes, and then he stops. Every 15 minutes he stops. And he puts a problem up on the board or up on the screen related to what he was just talking about. And usually it's a very simple problem, doesn't require any calculation, but it's purely conceptual. So it might be something like this. It might be a picture of a sailboat moving across the water, and somebody up in the crow's nest drops a ball. And underneath it, there's a question. Where is this ball going to land? Is it going to land here? Is it going to land here? Or is it going to land here? Basically,
a basic question, but if you don't understand the basics of gravity and physics, you can't answer it. And he puts the question to the students. Where do you think it's going? And they use, do you have electronic student response systems here, clickers? Any of you use that?
Sometimes I use the website.
Okay. So you could use
an access code.
With an access code. Well, when he developed this, he was still using clickers. And so basically he has everybody vote. Where's it going to land? A, B, or C? Everybody votes. Then he says, okay, turn to the person next to you and convince them, find out what they voted, and convince them that your answer is right and explain to them why you did it. And of course, the room gets loud like we did just a minute ago. People argue. And then he says, vote again. And people vote again. And what he finds, of course, is that after that interaction between the two of them, more people have answered the question right. That's it. That's peer instruction. And he does it 4 or 5 times in an hour lecture. And he does it all the time, and it's consistent. The difference between him doing that and this question of evidence-based is then he decided to study it. Because he did it for years and years and years. And he studied the effect of peer instruction. And what he found is that in the final exams and in written assessments of students' conceptual learning, that students who were in classes where he used peer assessment did better than they did when he didn't use peer assessment. And he did this over and over again, and then published it in a book called Peer Instruction, which of course led to other people experimenting with this technique. And now we have an evidence-based practice. So now, when I, as a consultant working with a faculty member, when I say, try peer instruction, I actually have the evidence to show that it actually works. And so do all of you. You can now say, this would be a good thing for me to try. Not just because it's a good idea, but because there's evidence that there's a good idea. So I have just a general question for you, which is, you understand the process of peer instruction. And we know that from Eric's research that it works. It seems to help students do better on final exams. Let's speculate for a minute. Why do you think this process, and I think there are many answers to this, what is it about this process of peer instruction that helps students learn? What's going on here? What's going on in the learning process? Why does engaging in peer instruction help students learn? Let's just collect a bunch of answers. What's one?
Makes the things related to the practice,
Yes. First of all, it gives them practice thinking about what they're learning. What else? Why else is this helping students learn? Yes. Yes, that's right. They're not just taking notes. They're listening, and they're talking. They're active. That's helping students learn. What else? Yes?
They get deeper into analysis of the situation.
Excuse me?
More analysis of the situation.
Yes, they're spending more time analyzing because they're having to justify to someone why they think the ball is going to land here and not there. Back up there. That's right. They're actively looking for the solution to the problem. They're engaging in active problem solving. One more.
Eliminate distraction.
Pardon me?
Eliminate distraction for students.
That's right. So they might be sitting there and they're not really listening, but now they're suddenly paying attention. It eliminates distraction. We were talking the other day about another study that has been done that has shown that even for great lecturers, you've got about 15 to 20 minutes of of good attention from your audience before you have to stop and do something else. Change it up. Lecturing for an hour straight, no matter how brilliant your lecture is, and I love a good lecture. I'm a fan of the lecture. I actually really like lectures. But the fact is, we know from research that students' ability to process information begins to drop off after about 20 minutes. So that poses a challenge for those of us who teach by lecturing. How am I going to use a technique like peer instruction or some other technique to make sure that my lecture is a learning experience and not just a passive listening experience? There's two different experiences. There's a listening experience and there's a learning experience. And as many of you have suggested, peer instruction creates a learning experience. So now I want to turn my attention to one specific piece of evidence, or a chunk, really, of evidence that is, I think, very, very powerful for teaching and learning right now. And it is the question of how people learn. A minute ago, when we, together as a group, speculated on why peer instruction works, we were basically speculating, and we were using our basic understanding of how people learn, right? And we were saying, well, the reason that they're learning is because they're active, they're engaged, they're processed, they're practicing. Well, the good news for us is that these kinds of things are now have been for the last 30 years studied in earnest. And then something happened. At least in the United States, this book was published in the year 2000. It's called simply How People Learn. And it was published by the National Research Council, which is a very highly regarded research council in the United States. They don't normally publish books on teaching and learning, but they published this one about how people learn, and we can use it. Number two, it expressed this idea that we know how people learn by combining data and evidence from multiple fields: psychology, sociology, linguistics, and the burgeoning field of cognitive neuroscience. So it wasn't narrowly defined. They pulled in evidence from all kinds of fields. And the third thing that made this particular book so powerful for teachers and learners is that they finally talked about evidence of not how children learn, but how adults learn. Previously, 90% of the stuff that was published and researched about human learning focused on children, how children learn. Because why? Children are a lot easier to study. You know, you put them in a room, you give them some blocks, you photograph them, and you figure out how students learn. Adults are harder to study, but we are studying how adults learn. And this book, How People Learn, set off a bit of a firestorm of interest in the question. And one thing that it set off was a series of other books, and books that took the work of how people learn and took it to the next step, particularly for college teachers. And this book, called How Learning Works, is an excellent example of that fallout of the book. This book, How Learning Works, came out 4 years after How People Learn. It was written by the directors and associate directors and the faculty associates of the Eberly Teaching and Learning Center at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And it is and it has become a remarkable resource for college teachers, because it not only talks about what we know about how people learn, but it goes to the next step and talks about what we as teachers can do about it. So this is where I want to focus my attention for the remainder of this hour. And I want to take, and it's obviously called 7 research-based principles. I want to take a look at just one of them in depth with you. But before I do that, to give you a context, I just want to share with you quickly what those 7 principles are so that you have a sense of the whole picture. The 7 principles of how learning works that they focus on are: number 1, that students' prior knowledge, what students know or think about before they ever come into our class, is key to their ability to learn new material. 2, that how students organize information influences how they learn and how they are able to apply what they learn. 3, this one is known to all of us, that students' motivation determines, directs, and sustains what they learn. We've all known that. Anyone who teaches knows the importance of motivation. But what they do nicely in this book is they go deep and looking at what are the sources of motivation. The 4th is, to develop mastery, students must acquire component skills and practice integrating them and in order to know and apply what they have learned. This is a key element. I've been working with teachers for 30 years. So I've seen so often where courses are taught, and they're taught in a relatively passive way, and then on the final, students are asked to apply what they've learned. Okay? That makes no sense at all, because application is the hardest skill. And application is something you have to learn how to do. So you can't teach didactically for 8 weeks and then say, oh, on the final you're going to apply it. The application is the skill. Students have to start applying from day 1. Anyway, it's this question of mastery, this question of being able to master practical skills. The next one, goal-directed practice coupled with targeted feedback enhances the quality of students' learning. This is a principle that reminds us that we need to teach in a way that allows students to form their own goals. The next one is a very interesting one. It's complicated. Students' current level of development interacts with the social, emotional, and intellectual climate of the course to impact learning. It's complicated, but I know this one all too well, because one of the main areas that I work in is teaching faculty members how to teach freshmen, how to reach students when they first get to college. This is their developmental, their level of development. When students first get to college, and I see some of you nodding, you can't teach students who are 18 and new to college the same way you teach seniors. And teaching freshmen is so important. And often the way we teach freshmen makes it impossible to learn. But it's not just the way we teach, it has to do with the climate that we set up in the classroom. Anyway, I could spend a week doing a workshop on this or any one of these. But I want to talk about the last one. In order to become self-directed learners, students must learn to monitor and adjust their approach to learning. This is what we sometimes call learning how to learn. That one thing that we know is that, and I'll give you a quick example, that one of the key elements of success in school for students is the fact that some students, they know when they know something. And other students, they don't know when they know something. And they don't know when they don't know something. How many of you have ever had a student come to you after a midterm and say, I studied for 20 hours for this midterm. How could I have done so poorly? Huh? Yeah, you hear it all the time. And the answer is because you don't have any capacity to monitor your own learning. We call this sometimes metacognition, knowing about cognition. If you don't have metacognition, you can study for 100 hours and you still won't learn. It's key to success. So the question then becomes, for us, what can we as teachers, or is there anything that we as teachers can do to help our students develop metacognition? Turns out there is. So the reason I wanted to show you all 7 of these is because I can look at least 5 of them, and over the past 10 years, I have done week-long, semester-long, and year-long workshops and learning communities on each of these topics. This is the kind of where 6 or 7 faculty members would come together and look at, say, that last question. What can I do to help my students become better self-directed learners? This is the work that teaching centers do. And for today, we're going to do that briefly with the first one. The question of what is the relationship between learning or student success and their prior knowledge? So let's just take a look at that for a minute. So if we're going to talk about prior knowledge, we have to acknowledge a couple of things. First of all, this literature, which comes out of cognitive psychology, tends, the dominant theory of learning in cognitive psychology right now is called constructivism. And in a nutshell, what it says is that learning is the construction of knowledge, not the passive acceptance of it, but the construction of knowledge. And basically this process happens all the time, and this is what we end up with. This is it's just a model. But it's a model that represents what understanding looks like in the human mind. It's messy, but it's not completely meaningless. So what we can see here is a pretty tight clump in the middle with really big dots. And those big dots sort of represent key ideas, strong ideas, strongly held ideas and facts. And in the center, each of us has our core understanding of things. You notice that all the nodes are connected by really strong lines. In other words, this is basically that center. This is how we understand the world. This is how we get through the day. This is our understanding of life and how things work. And it's surrounded by clusters and clumps of knowledge. This might be how to ride a bike. This is our knowledge about fixing the toilet. Over here is our knowledge about some experiences we had. It's all there. It's all there. And some of it is way out here. It doesn't really affect how we function. Some of it is really strong, and we know a lot about it, and you can see all the connections. But this is what knowledge is. This is how knowledge is formed. It's in our minds, and it's held together by strong and weak links. And this is, then, if that's what knowledge is, then this is basically what learning is. Learning is some new piece of knowledge that the teacher has just said, and learning occurs when that new piece of knowledge gets taken into our current understanding. But that can happen in lots of different ways. So here's our prior knowledge, and here's our new learning. So not only do we know that prior knowledge exists, but we know a little bit about it. let's talk about some of its elements. Number one, prior knowledge can be correct or incorrect. This knowledge cluster here, just because some of these nodes have dots doesn't mean they're right. This thing is loaded with misconceptions. The whole thing could be a misconception. But it's our prior knowledge. We believe it, but it doesn't mean it's correct. It can be deep or it can be surface. It can be implicit or explicit. In other words, there are some elements of this knowledge that we can talk about. And there are some that we don't even know we know. Okay? It includes attitudes, and anyone who's ever taught knows that embedded in people's knowledge are hundreds of thousands of attitudes. Positive attitudes, negative attitudes. It includes habits and skills. Some of these clusters, as I said before, this one here is how to ride a bike. It's not just knowledge, it's a skill. Knowledge and skills go together. And maybe most important of all for learning is it's persistent and it's resistant. This model here, this is my brain, it does not want to change. Because change takes effort, okay? And I don't want to make effort, you know? I like my brain the way it is. And we can introduce such elegant theories. And I mean, I'm just going to go by a sort of nod. How many of you have ever spent a week or 2 weeks teaching something? And then at the end of the quarter, in their papers or exams, students write, and it's like you never said anything. Has anyone ever happened? Yes, of course. Well, this is why. This is why. It's because they had an understanding already, and your understanding never made it in. So I was going to well, let's take a look at a case. So here we have a student who's in class. Here's a teacher, and has just taught something. Well, one of three things can happen. A, the knowledge can bounce off. Yeah, we've all seen that. B, this is important. The knowledge can get in. See, it became that little cluster next to B. It's in, but it's way on the outskirts. It's way on the outskirts, and it's not very well connected to the student's core understanding. That's what I like to call school learning. It lasts about a day or two, maybe a week, hopefully until the final. But the next week, it's gone. The threads that hold that piece of knowledge in are not strong enough to persist, and it's gone. And maybe C happens. That knowledge not only gets added to the core, it changes the shape of the core. That's what we call deep learning. But let's take a look at A for a minute. There are a lot of reasons why A happens. There are a lot of reasons why that new knowledge that you're teaching never gets in. Let's just brainstorm what some of those reasons are. Just what?
Difficult information.
The information is just too hard. Sorry, not going to learn that. Too hard. Don't get it. What else?
Student not interested.
Not interested. Yeah, I could learn it, but I just don't care. What's that? It's too boring. Sorry, not interested. What else? Pardon me? Yeah, I don't really like the thing that you're talking about right now. Or maybe I just don't like you. Right? Oh, that's what, I don't really like you as a teacher. I don't think I'm going to learn from you. What else? The time of the day. I just had lunch. I'm actually interested in what you're teaching, but I'm digesting right now. So, sorry, not going to get in. What else? Pardon? Say again? Yeah. Well, what you're telling me sounds really important, but I don't think you're going to test me on this, so I think I'll daydream instead. Okay, so the point is, there are a lot of reasons that A can happen. Yes, okay. 5 minutes more. Okay, so in 5 minutes we're going to take a break.
Because they need small.
Yes, of course, yes. I could use one too. So what is the solution to this? Okay, so great. There's this prior knowledge, it's persistent, da 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 da. What is the solution to this? The solution, according to cognitive theory, is a process called activation. The idea is simply this, that if we want students to integrate what we're teaching them into their prior knowledge, we've got to invite prior knowledge to the party. You know what I'm saying? We've got to find a way, before we teach anything, to activate, to get them thinking about their attitudes and their thoughts about what they already know. If you recall, when I started this talk, I asked you folks to think about what is it that you want your students to learn more of, right? Remember that at the beginning? Well, A, I am really interested in that. But the other reason I did it is because I wanted to activate your prior knowledge. I wanted you thinking about the courses that you teach, right? Before I begin to introduce all this stuff, I wanted to activate prior knowledge. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll answer the question, how can I activate prior knowledge for my students? Okay, see you after the break.
The best yet to be. Okay, we'll continue. Thank you. طيب خلينا نكمل إن شاء الله. Okay, so let's continue with Professor William, and we'll run until 1:30, and then we'll stop and have some concluding remarks, comments, questions. These will be more than welcome, because by the end of the day, we would like to integrate all the comments and the integrations. So, William, please, the stage is yours one more time.
Am I on? Yes. Yes, thank you. Okay, so when we left, we were talking about this phenomenon of prior knowledge, which is to say, what our students come to us with. It includes knowledge, attitudes, habits of mind, ways of doing things. And we talked about the fact that no matter what state that prior knowledge is in, no matter whether it's full of correct information or full of misconceptions, that's what we have to start with. That's what, if you're a teacher, that prior knowledge that students come into the classroom with is going to make the difference between whether students learn or don't learn. That prior knowledge is going to determine that whatever students do learn, if they're going to learn it, they have to connect it to that prior knowledge. Why? Because that's what learning is. Learning is constructing, understanding, by integrating new knowledge into what we already know. If that process doesn't happen, learning doesn't happen. That's as simple as that. So, and we, if you recall, we were looking at that situation where the knowledge just bounces off. So the question then becomes, And then we talked about the fact that, or I mentioned the fact that what we have to do is find ways to activate prior knowledge. How do we activate, how do we get students thinking about what they already know? How do we bring that knowledge to the party so that students can then construct new knowledge out of it? So, the first thing I want to do is I want you to think about something. I want you to think about, again, a course that you teach, and choosing from this list or a combination of things on this list, just identify for yourself and what kinds of prior knowledge do students tend to come into your classes with? Write down an example of something that you've noticed, whether it's a belief or an attitude about your topic, about what you're teaching, that students come into your classes with. Just think about that for a minute. So, for example, if I'm teaching a history course, or let's say I'm teaching a course on the history of China, I know that my students are going to come into that class with some preconceived notions about China, right? I mean, everybody knows about China. But some of that is going to be a preconceived notion. And if I'm teaching that class, I may notice that that preconceived notion rarely changes. It shows up on final exams, it shows up in papers, and I'm guessing that you all have something like that. Some kind of prior knowledge that is really persistent and maybe keeps students from learning what it is you'd like for them to learn. So just think about that for a minute, because this is an important first step. I think we're not going to do that. Let me back up here. So let's do a kind of a brainstorm. Thinking about that prior knowledge, what might you do? What might you do as a teacher to activate that prior knowledge on the first day? Or sometimes it's not a first day thing. Sometimes it's prior knowledge that's just relevant to a certain part of the lesson. But before you teach it, how might you activate students' prior knowledge on that topic? Think about that for a minute, and then I'll ask some people to give some suggestions. Because our goal here is to come up with a bunch of strategies for activating prior knowledge. And I'm going to crowdsource the room to say, what might you do to activate the prior knowledge that's working within your class? So think about that for a minute. And then I'll ask for volunteers. Does anybody have a suggestion for activating? Yes, so tell us who you are, what you teach, and what prior knowledge are you trying to activate, and how are you going to do it?
My name is Ali, and I teach microbiology course.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my name is Ali, and I teach hematology and blood banking courses.
Yeah.
One of my suggestions is to activate people to increase their pre-knowledge, is to give them homeworks on the basic things, or give part of the lectures as seminars to students so they can speak, they can understand each other, especially in the basic topics where you see they are weak in. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So one thing is, before you teach something, just give students a chance to speak about what they currently think. What's another strategy? Down here, right up front. Excuse me. Thank you. Right. Could you keep your hand up? Thank you.
Yes, my name is Hana Ibrahim. It depends on the course or the subject that I'm teaching. For example, in a novel course or in a literary criticism course, I would begin by asking directly about certain concepts that's related to the knowledge I'm going to communicate with students. And the other thing, maybe I would read the quotation and see what kind of response will be stimulated by the students. So we have different approaches depending on the course and depending on the subject itself.
Thank you. So finding a way to engage students around topics that they're interested in at the beginning. Let's try one more. Do we have one more strategy for right over there, please? Thank you.
Naim Musa Business School. We can start the lecture with words such as, I know that you know, and then we can add, but we are going to analyze more.
Thank you very much. So basically what you're saying is just acknowledge to students that they know something about this. And that makes students feel good. So look, I know you guys, so I'll come back to the China example. I know that you guys know a lot of things about China. And we're going to build on that. And we're going to take a look at those things that we know, and we're going to see if we can refine our understanding. Basically, you're signaling to students, we're going to build on your prior knowledge. So that's another excellent strategy. I'm going to share with you a group of them that are things that you can do easily to activate and engage your students' prior knowledge. You could have them do a 1-minute paper. Simply say, okay, before we start talking about ancient China, I want you to get out a piece of paper and I want you to write down all the words that come to you when you think about China. Just get it out. You just activate it. And then you can begin, and they can begin to use that. You can do a brainstorm, and I'll give you an example that I actually used from my own teaching once. I was teaching a course in organizational theory, and we were starting the section on leadership. And I had my lecture all ready to go, blah, 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 types of leadership, yada, yada, yada. But instead of starting the lecture, I said, let's do this first. I want you to brainstorm every person that you can think of who is a leader. And I just stood at the board and they just screamed out names. And I must have written 60 names on the board. And then we sat back and we looked at the names. And you know, what did we notice? What did we see? But the point is, and actually it became a very interesting conversation. It led right into what I wanted to talk about. But what's more important is it got everybody thinking. Because when you say the word leader, what pops into people's minds isn't a series of traits, it's a person. And so activating prior knowledge, that worked very well for that thing. Asking the question, what steps would you take? Because some prior knowledge is procedural. It's how you go about things. So you might simply ask, I know we have a lot of architects in the room. You might ask something like, okay, you've just gotten a commission to build a hospital. What are the first 5 steps you would take before you started designing that thing? And student, but I've never designed that. Doesn't matter. Just what would you do? And you reveal students' implicit procedural knowledge. And then they know, they can then build on that and say, well, that's what you would do. Let's take a look at the steps that a professional architect does, and you can see how it actually produces a better outcome. You can do a think, pair, share like we have done today. Think about something, find a partner, share it, and talk about it. Talking about activating prior knowledge. You can do an ungraded quiz. You write down 3 interesting questions on a piece of paper and just say, just do this quiz quickly. And you're activating prior knowledge. This is before you've taught anything. This is activating prior knowledge. You can use a formal assessment tool. There are a variety of formal assessment tools out there for many fields, if you happen to have one. And you can use a student response system. If you're teaching a large class and you are using a clicker system or a student response system, you can simply say, you can pose a question. What do you think the first step in doing X is? A, B, or C? And you can immediately get students' prior knowledge. It doesn't matter how you do it. The important thing is to do it, to activate prior knowledge. All right, we're gonna wrap up this section just by a little bit of review. We talked about backward design that creates learning goals, clear student-centered learning goals. And then we talked about evidence-based teaching practice. And the same is true. What's interesting about evidence-based teaching practice is they also make for excellent evidence-based assessment practices. The same strategies that you can use to activate prior knowledge, you can also use to assess end-of-term knowledge, or end-of-class knowledge. So, back here. Now, instead of assessing prior knowledge, we're assessing knowledge at the end of a lecture. You can use brainstorming. You can use a 1-minute paper. And I'm going to show you an example of one in a minute. You can use a quiz, and you can use a student response system. So, let me show you an example of using a 1-minute paper as an assessment tool. This is something that I use almost every class I teach. At the end of the individual class, I ask students to write down their answer to these 2 things. What is the main? Please write down one idea or concept from this talk that you will use in your teaching. This is what I would ask you. And write down one question you are left with at the end of this talk. I do this at the end of every class. And what I do is I then collect those and I use them to start my next class. So I'm starting my next class with an assessment of what students took away, and guess what? Sometimes what they took away, completely wrong. Like, oh my God, how did you get that from what I was saying? But it happens. And when it happens, I want to know about it. Because if the next lecture depends on the lecture that came before, and they got the one that came before completely wrong, why even give the next lecture, right? Why even have the next class? And then this question, the second one, write down one question you are left with. I mean, this does multiple things. It lets me know where students are confused, but it also encourages intellectual curiosity. I'm trying to encourage them to realize that just because I've given a lecture doesn't mean I've covered everything, doesn't mean that I was clear. You know, I'm trying to encourage them to take an active role in their own learning by saying, look, the goal of all learning is to have more questions, is to ask increasingly sophisticated questions. So if I've given a lecture on how people learn and prior knowledge, sure, I hope you learn a little bit about that. But what I really hope is that you leave wondering about other things, about teaching, about thinking, and about how students learn. That's actually what I really am trying to do. I'm trying to engage your curiosity about these topics. And that's what this question does. So that's so what I want to do. You have to give me a second. I want to change gears now and move to the second part of my talk, which is right here. All right. So in this part, so basically what you just experienced, what we just experienced together in the first part, in the first talk, was, as I said, a big part of what a teaching center does. One of the main things that a teaching center does is, number one, creates a venue for talking about teaching, raise questions about teaching, introduce new information that could be useful to teachers about teaching. This is what, these are the things that a teaching center does. And so I want to share with you a little bit more about this. And here, again, I'm trying to articulate my learning goals as clearly as I can. My goals for this part of the talk is that you understand the various roles that teaching centers play, that maybe you've reflected on the services that a teaching center might play for you, and that you can maybe describe how a teaching center would advance the mission and value and culture of teaching and learning at your institution. So that's my goal for this last part of the last 40 minutes. And I'm going to do that, although I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of teaching centers, just because I think you are now in that history, but you are in an interesting part of where that goes. Description of what teaching centers do, and then a discussion of the ways that teaching centers might work for you as individuals and your campus. Now, we already did this, the gripe session. So we're not going to do it again. But the reason I put this on here is this. In 1962, the University of Michigan, which, as many of you may know, is one of the great universities, certainly in the United States. Yeah, Mountaintop. It is often considered the best public university in the United States, and it is one of the top universities in the world. Well, in 1962, the University of Michigan opened the first teaching center in the United States. And the question is why? Why did this university, there was no such thing as a teaching center. Why did they invent this thing, essentially, this model? And there are a lot of answers to that question, some of them political, some of them whatnot. But the reality is, and there's a history of this, which I'll show you in a minute, that the main thing that they were focusing on is comments by the faculty members themselves. In the 1960s, higher education in the United States was exploding. Tens of thousands of new students were coming to college and university. Many of them were ill-prepared. There was a whole new kind of, teaching had taken on a whole new set of challenges. And basically, faculty all over the country, but especially at Michigan, were saying, we need some new models. We need some new models if we're going to be able to reach these students. At the same time, universities were growing and becoming very complicated, administrative, giant things. And what was also happening is people were saying, you know what? Teaching is being left behind. And so, because of a combination of things, the very first teaching center was opened in 1962. By the way, it is still open today, and it is the top 3 teaching centers still in the United States. It's an amazing organization and a tribute both to the people at the center and the university overall. In 1996, a colleague of mine, I think she's now retired, at the University of Texas, Austin, produced an article called Faculty Development in the United States, A Brief History. So this is where this is coming from, and I just want to show you how this grows. So we have 1962 with Michigan. By 1969, there were 50 faculty development programs in the United States. By 75, 41% of all 4-year institutions had a faculty development center. By 86, 44, and by 1995, 67 of the top 104 research universities in the United States had a Center for Teaching and Learning. I would say that right now it's more like 90 of the top 104. There are a couple of schools that were late to the game. Yale, for example, I got there well after 1995, did not have a Center for Teaching. Caltech, California Technical Institute, which many of you may have heard of, just opened one 5 years ago. So they're continuing to open. Karen Lewis also talked about in 1996, what is it that teaching centers do? And she listed a bunch of the things that teaching centers back then were doing. It's not comprehensive, but it's kind of a list of what most teaching centers were doing. Most of it has to do with instructional development. But the point I really want to make is this. Number one, that in the modern era, what allows a teaching center to be effective is not that it follows some predetermined model, but that it be responsive to and appropriate for the institution where it exists. A woman named Connie Cook, who was the director of the center at Michigan for 15 years, she just retired. She and her team wrote a book a few years ago called How a Teaching Center Can Advance the Culture of Teaching and Learning on Campus. And no one was in a better position to write this book than she was, a true scholar and expert. And basically, it's a great book, but there's one main theme that comes across, and that is this, that a Center for Teaching is first and foremost a service organization. It is there to service the faculty, who in turn service or provide service to the students. But the primary client of a Center for Teaching is you, is the faculty members who, and the reason for that is that's where the energy of the teaching center comes from. That's certainly where the energy of my teaching center comes from. It comes from the questions and the challenges that faculty bring to me about their own teaching, about the curriculum in their department, about working with graduate students. That's where the energy of the teaching center comes from. In addition, these days, teaching centers have broad influence from, of course, the individual faculty member. But I know in my center, we work a lot with departments, helping them come up with ways to improve the curriculum and support the teachers in their departments. We work with schools, divisions, we work with the entire university all the time. Our university is about to change the way it structures teaching for graduate students. I'm going to be a big part of that. We work with academic disciplines. I don't know if this is true in your fields, but in many fields, when you go to your annual meeting of professors in your field, there are usually 3 or 4 sessions about teaching in that discipline. And those sessions are often taught by or led by people who are in some way associated with the teaching center. And then even influence at the level of state and nation. And in a way, the fact that, I come here from the United States is an example of influences around teaching and learning coming from teaching centers across states and across nations. So, I have one question for you. So the question then is, we want to focus on the individual. I want you to hear, to think about what, I think I may have a slide for this. No, maybe I don't. So the question is, what service or question, and many of you brought these to me on the break, so this is what we want to talk about. What service or question would you bring to a teaching center, to somebody like me, if I were in that role, or somebody in that role? what question or service would you bring to the teaching center that would be helpful to you in your teaching? Take a minute and think about that. And then I'll just ask for people to reply, because this is the start of building a teaching center. Asking the faculty, what question or what service might the teaching center offer you or your department that would be helpful and help you teach better? Yes, sir. Oh, can we get the microphone? Okay. Yeah. Can we get the microphone?
What can you advise an institute in an Arab work to develop our skills in teaching?
Okay, I don't completely understand. Can you say that again?
What sort of advice
Yes.
you give me, being a professor in an Arab world, teaching Arab students with a background, Arabic background?
Okay, I don't know how I would answer that, but that's a good question that you should bring to the teaching center. Absolutely, because it is absolutely contextual. That, to me, would be one of the main questions. I can even see a paper coming out of that, which is what are the unique challenges and what are some of the ways of teaching in a particular culture? That's a great question. I think the teaching center should address that. What other questions? You, sir.
Thank you very much for the wonderful speech. My name is Basim Marek from Pharmacy College. I think one of our most crucial problems are the critical thinking abilities for our students.
Yes.
And dealing with undergrads in a private school, you know, sometimes the input comes from less than governmental universities.
Yes.
So we have many problems with critical thinking.
Yes.
We have many problems with English language.
Yes.
And we teach in English. So usually, especially for sophomores and freshmen, we have the problem with that kind of teaching because they come from the public schools,
yes,
which lack the ability to teach in a practical way. So we deal with students who have 12 years of education in a traditional way.
Right.
Then we need to move them to another level of teaching.
Yes.
And mostly we have problems with that.
Okay.
Can I help you with this question?
Sure.
Thank you very much.
This is really great question. You know, based again in my research on the area of mental health, we are coming from non-democratic societies. We grow up, and I'm talking about the traditional society or collectivist societies, where the kids grow up and waiting for instruction. We are telling them what to do. Now, here, what you're trying to propose, which is a real challenge for us who are teaching in the Middle East at least, you want to encourage them for exploring, right? And they are waiting for our instructions. There is some kind of contradiction here, and we have to think how to approach that. Because I grow in a society where my father and my teacher in school tell me what to do. So there's a lack of some kind of independent thinking in one way. It's a real challenge, and I appreciate what you're saying. The question is, how are we going to deal with that? By the end of the day, we are teaching the students from the Arab world. They are coming, and there is a common themes of commonalities among our students, regardless if it's in Jordan or Palestine or the Gulf countries. It's a real challenge for us, although we notice there's some kind of individualism developed in the Arab world, but still the structure, we see that in therapy.
We see that in therapy, even as a mental health practitioners, when you practice with your people, you try to help them to get to the level of insight. There is something they are waiting for you to give them instruction. So there is something here need to be taken into account.
Yeah, there's no question. And by the way, so there's a cultural piece, but the fact is, how you approach that with your students is going to be different for all of you. There's going to be some commonalities, but at the end of the day, there aren't many one-size-fits-all solutions when it comes to teaching. There are principles, but at the end of the day, each individual faculty member has to find a way to build a course that works. And over the break we were talking, another challenge that came up, and I think you alluded to this, that students are not always prepared for college. And what makes them ill-prepared are things that we've heard people talk about. Attitudes, which in this case might not include critical thinking. Basic skills. Basic skills, as you mentioned, in English. Basic skills in problem solving. Basic skills in self-monitoring. Basic skills in knowing how to set a goal and then meet it. So I've worked at and work now at some very illustrative institutions like Yale and University of Chicago, where frankly the students are so bright, the faculty can barely keep up with them. And they will tell you that, and I've seen it. But I've also worked at a school which was 25 years old, a new school, not unlike yours, in Florida, which had an open admissions policy because they wanted to increase enrollment, because that's what new schools do. They need students. And the faculty were going crazy. And so I developed a series of workshops called Working with Underprepared Students. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about students who, by virtue of mostly just the training they've gotten in their background, are not prepared for a university that wants them to engage in critical thinking. And this is going to be a big challenge for you that I hope that the Teaching Center can help you with. But I will say one thing about that. And and this is just me. Maybe somebody else has another answer for this. At the end of the day, you have to teach the students you have. You know what I mean? You have to teach the students that you have. You have no other choice. You have to teach them. You have to start where they are. You have to, through assessment or whatever, and then once you know where they are, guess what? There's only so far you can take them in a quarter. Now, I know it doesn't mean that you don't have those higher goals for your students when they finish by the time they finish their program. But the fact is, teaching is fundamentally, at the end of the day, about figuring out where your students are and then assessing how far can I get this student. And that is a thrilling process. If instead you say, well, here's my standard and my students are here, nobody wins. You have a frustrating time as a teacher because no student ever meets your standard. The students feel like failures and they don't learn. And you can do that year after year after year, and that just doesn't help anyone. So what this means then, though, often, is a readjustment of approaches and saying, wherever my students are, I'm going to see if I can get them 4 steps by the end of this term. Man, that to me is teaching at its best. That is such satisfying teaching, to see if I can get students 4 steps. Why? Because when that class is over, that student has the experience of saying, you know what? I can do something that I couldn't do before. That's what teaching is at the end of the day. So this is a long way of saying, actually, it's kind of coming back to what I said at the very beginning, which is yes, there are those 60,000-foot goals and whatnot, and they're very important. But what I do every day, spend 80% of my time doing every day, is working with individual faculty and figuring out how can we make your class a learning experience for students so that you feel good and they feel good and the university is making progress day after day after day. It's a very much on the ground kind of exercise. One more of these. How could that? Yes, this gentleman right here.
Thank you very much. I am Professor Hamzi, Faculty of Engineering. So I think that the rules you introduce us can be valid for students with medium GPA or higher.
Right.
Now my question is there any module or a revised approach for students with very low GPA? Because such things we are interested in.
Thank you for suggesting that. I happen to know, just because I've been talking with your colleagues, that it's true that there are students who are literally so lacking in skills. And that's what a low GPA is. It doesn't mean they're stupid. It just means they never developed the skills they needed to succeed in school. And for these kids, there are some things that we can do in the context of our own classes. But probably for a majority of them, they may need some kind of, for lack of a better term, special help or remedial help. Programs to help get them on board with their study skills, with understanding what college is. When we say, we all toss around the term critical thinking, and of course we all have 100 different definitions of what that means, but at least they kind of converge. But to a kid who has never been asked to think and question this whole concept of critical thinking, not only does they not know what it is, they may not even buy it. They may not even think it's a good thing. And they need to know that. They need to know that this attitude that they hold, it's theirs to hold. It's a belief. But it is going to keep them from succeeding in college. It goes against what their professors want them to do. Yes? Right over there. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Manal from Pharmacy College. Since we are speaking about the students and different levels of students, how can I evaluate my performance then? Yeah, of course, I'm doing my best. Am I in the right track or not?
That's a great question. That is a really great question. And this is something that you will have to essentially negotiate as a campus. Hopefully the teaching center can help with that. But here's one answer. There are two ways to evaluate the success of a teacher. One is by looking at a universal standard and saying which teachers students got to that standard. And sometimes that's appropriate to do that. But there's another way, and it's how far did my students go? I think it's a much better standard for thinking about teaching, especially when you're getting started. Which is to say, I did this assessment of my 25 students at the beginning of the semester, and this is where they were. They didn't have this skill, they couldn't do this, they didn't have any knowledge about these 4 things. And by the time they finished with me, they had gone all this distance. They could do all these things. This is And I know faculty, I work with faculty who do this on their own every single semester. They do a pretest. It's a classic social science research structure. Pretest, post-test. You give an assessment at the beginning and you give one at the end, and you look at how much distance has been traveled. So to me, as you're going through this process, this is something that I would deeply encourage, is for the teaching center to help faculty members design pre and post tests for their students so that you can measure how far students have traveled on the things that you care about. Remember how that first question, how do you want students to be different by the end? That's a question that you produce as a teacher. And you come up with that, and then you take a look at who your students are, and you say, you know what? I'm going to see if I can move my students, maybe not all the way, halfway. It's all about moving students, okay? So it's complicated, but this is the kind of thing that a teaching center should be working with departments and individuals to figure out ways to acknowledge faculty members who are moving students forward. Okay, one last question here. Yes?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
At the nursing school, we are trying to turn into competency-based curriculum, which is student-centered.
Yes.
So actually, we're doing a lot of brainstorming sessions to discuss how we can do that.
Yep.
We have two main challenges till now. One is already covered by one of the questions, is how to create the right culture with among the teachers and the students. Because
Yes.
there is what you said, sharing of power with the students, and the teacher is not used to do that.
That's correct.
That's one thing. The other challenge is also the flexibility that should be there when you apply this kind of
Yes.
curriculum.
That's correct.
So you have to have, depending on student pace, let's say,
Right.
And I think, given the kind of students we have, it's the best model to use, especially, in applied sciences.
Yes.
So the second challenge is competencies. Second point. But the first challenge is sharing the power, the flexibility.
Flexibility.
The flexibility is how to go around the policies and the accreditation requirements and the standards and provide that kind of flexibility. This will be the second challenge that we need to discuss with a center like this.
That's exactly.
How to do that, how to approach it,
Yes.
and provide this flexibility we need.
That's right. So in other words, if you want to teach somebody to pole vault over an 18-foot bar, you don't start by setting the bar at 18. Right? What you do is you create a long-term strategy for students. I mean, and in some ways this is not a great analogy, but it works, it's okay. But the first is that you create flexibility so that different departments and different divisions and different faculty members can figure out a way to get there. But actually it's a bad analogy because ideally that bar should be reached collaboratively between the institution and the individual, because maybe that bar won't work it isn't the right bar. And so building in flexibility is done through collaboration. And yes, this is the kind of thing that a teaching center, I can see you calling on a teaching center to help you do that. So
Yes.
Excuse me. Okay, yes, thank you.
My name is Dr. Majd Asile, Faculty of Arts and Science.
Do you think that we also need to develop the students using the upper mental process in our teaching? For example, my subject is sports and health. I teach sports and health, and I also always try to use for the student to encourage them to develop their using the upper mental process by finding the relations between, for example, nutrition and fitness, nutrition or body mass or something like that. In other ways, did you think that there's a difference between critical thinking and using upper mental process?
Okay. Thanks. So that's a really interesting question. I'm going to start with the last thing you said. Do I think there's a difference between critical thinking and using upper level mental processes? Technically, they're just terms, and they basically mean the same thing. I mean, basically, critical thinking is the idea. When you talk about upper level processes, there's a taxonomy developed by a fellow who was at the University of Chicago named Ben Bloom, and it's called Bloom's Taxonomy of High. Some of you may have seen it. It's very, very common. I actually took a class with Ben Bloom. He's about this tall. Anyway, it defines learning as a series of levels, the lowest being memorization and the highest being evaluation, which is the ability of a student to, let's say in a field of architecture, to actually evaluate the quality of an architectural work. That's a very high level of competence that people they get to usually as PhD students, right? But it's very high level. But the fact is, we as teachers, we don't want to just teach low level. We don't want to just teach memorization. We want to see our students synthesizing and analyzing. We want to see them applying theories. Here's the theory. Can you apply it to a case? So my answer to your question is absolutely. Not only is it good, it's essential. And it seems like it's particularly essential in this, in the climate, with the students that you have, to move them beyond spitting back and memorizing, or being able to repeat a theory, which is not, by the way, not understanding a theory, right? It's one of the tricky elements of teaching. Students can write down very fancy words, and you think, oh my God, the student is so smart. No, they're not. They just memorized that. They have no idea what it means, but they can write it. But if that's all we ask them to do, no one is learning. But to answer your question, yes, higher order thinking and figuring out what is higher order thinking in my field is something that a teaching center is ideally situated to do, and then helping you target your teaching. So thank you for those. I'm going to have to move on, but thank you. What we've just done in this exercise with people... 10 minutes left. Yeah, 10 minutes, perfect. What we've just done is we're starting the work of the teaching center, and I know that the folks in front here are listening. These are the kinds of questions that the teaching center needs to address. And frankly, this question of what is going to help you teach better is the question that the teaching center, I think, will be asking over and over and over and over again. As I said at the beginning, the success of a teaching center is based on one thing primarily and one thing alone, and that is its ability to be actually responsive to the faculty that it is serving. So we've, in some ways, just begun that process here today, which is pretty exciting. So I've just jotted down the teaching centers that I know. You guys did the really more interesting stuff, which is raising actual questions from your teaching, the challenges you face. But from a structural point of view, these are the kinds of things that teaching centers tend to create that faculty members can access and join. Individual consultation, getting a grant to begin to work on these things in your own department, creating learning communities. For example, I can see a learning community around this question of higher order thinking, where different faculty members come together and say, what are the higher order thinking that we want students to do in nursing, in pharmacy, in architecture? Of course, attending a workshop and seminar like you're doing today. A big part of what faculty members do for teaching centers is be part of it, which is you've just done something really cool in your class. You've just discussed, or you serve on a panel and you talk about it. This notion, this idea that one of the most important things a teaching center does is create an avenue and a venue for people to talk about what they're doing. You know, I don't know if it's true here, but it's certainly true at a lot of universities, all of the universities I've been at. Two people can be teaching next to each other, one in room A and one in room B, for 10 years. And they don't even know what's going on in the next room. Does that happen here? You know, or you work with a colleague in your department for 10 years, and you don't know what that person does in their classroom. It's a little crazy, but it's absolutely common. And one thing that the teaching center does is break down those silos. Very, very important. And then the last thing is designing a scholarship and teaching project. I mentioned to you when you brought up your question about pre and post testing. Well, which a lot of faculty members do on their own. And this kind of work, testing my own teaching, has a name. It's called the Scholarship of Teaching, and there's an entire society devoted to the Scholarship of Teaching to help faculty members learn for themselves, what am I doing that's working? And teaching centers are big supporters of that. So to close, I want to raise one really, really big question. And it's a question that people, myself, in my field have been asking since the beginning, which is it possible for a center for teaching to actually change the culture of an institution? I'm not dealing with is it likely. I'm just talking, is it even possible? Well, it turns out that a fellow named William Condon and his associates set out to do that. They looked at two different campuses. The Washington State University and Carleton College, two vastly different institutions. A big state institution, and Carleton College, which is a small liberal arts college, very high quality, but a small liberal arts college. And at both of these schools, there were some very serious faculty development and programs in place. And this study was the first study to actually show a direct relationship between faculty members engaging in instructional development and a relationship between that and students actually learning more across the boards. So here's some of the findings. In a world civilization course, so the total faculty is, there are 400. In a one world civilization course, a group of faculty participated in something called the Critical Thinking Project, a project where they learned techniques for advancing critical thinking. And all the students were given a common final. And for those faculty who had gone through it, learned to teach differently, their students' scores went from 2.4 to 3.1 on a scale of 6. And a similar thing happened for the quality of student writing in an entomology class. At another campus, the entire faculty learned a critical thinking methodology, and on a 6-point scale, their students went up by 0.7 points in 2003. Then they tested those same, they went back 6 years after the faculty members had been trained to do this kind of, in this critical thinking methodology. And what they found is that their students' scores on this 6-point scale went up another 0.6 points. In other words, what these faculty members conclude is that this training that these faculty members had gone through was not only powerful in the moment, but that the learning persisted. And the students at these two schools were actually learning more because their faculty members had engaged in faculty development. But this is the part about culture. So Inside Higher Education in 2016 did an interview with William Condon, the author of the book. And this is what he said. They were talking about a culture of resistance to teaching, and he wrote, every institution has that culture, of course. And our results showed that our two schools had developed to the point that we'd say we have a generative culture of teaching and learning. In other words, what institutional value, as enacted in various faculty development opportunities, continues to spread beyond the set of faculty who were directly involved in the original effort or initiative. In other words, it didn't take reaching every single faculty member to change the culture. What it took was reaching a critical mass. And in both of these institutions, vastly different, and somebody had asked me about this on the break, what had happened over time is that the culture of teaching and learning had changed. The culture had changed among the students, and the culture had changed among the faculty in a way that was way more satisfying for both. This is the first study of its kind, this book, Faculty Development and Student Learning, to actually find a connection between the activity of faculty members thinking and reflecting on their teaching in constructive ways with each other and student learning. And what they also found was a huge change in the culture. So, hold on. What happened to my last slide? Son of a gun. I guess I'm going to have to do this myself. Well, I had a last slide that basically said 2 words on it, and those 2 words were thank you. I want to thank you for your participation, thank you for your generosity, and I wish you enormous luck and success in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we really, before we thank you, you can stay with us here. I just want to say a few words. I think it's really, before we thank you, you know, when I look at the history of teaching centers, it's really amazing how it went from major universities and I think this is yours. Oh, okay. You know, and I very much enjoyed the workshop today, and it's really opened a lot of questions and raised a lot of directions and a real challenge for us. And I always used to say, even in my writing as a prof, you know, we can bring some knowledge which develops somewhere and to bring it to our own culture. And so the question is how to adjust that to the reality we are dealing with. It's not easy, it's making it complicated, but it's doable. It's doable. And you know what? Talking about creativity, that's a sort of creativity. We are here in this process by being open up to the body of knowledge, which is a Western-oriented, bring it to the East. In this case, that's put us in a position how to be creative. وهذا جزء من التفكير out of the box, right? And it's really a real challenge for us, and I really enjoyed your presentation very much. The other question, which is I think it's very important, you know, we are dealing with the students who are coming from all levels. Some of them are from underprivileged communities with, let's say, I don't want to use the word weak, but there's some difficulties. And I think a center like this can also provide support to our students. We all believe, and I think this knowledge came from the United States of America, when we talk about growth, development, and persistence, we would like to see our students complete the program, not to drop rate. And sometimes if we don't provide support to our students, and if we are not aware of the importance of such a center, then we will miss some of our students, or maybe they will complete their studies and they became excellent, let's say, I don't know, nurse or teachers or whatever, but they are not good thinkers. And I think our university here, we are in a process where we would like to teach our students how to think, not what to think, because by the end of the day, we develop that direction. So I would like to take this opportunity. Please join me before we give you something here. You're going to go home. Join me to thank Professor William for his excellent workshop, and he will continue working with us to keep developing this center. And I was really very pleased that we hosted today a big guy, Dr. Bashir Zobi. He's really a big shot here in Jordan. And he was very happy, and he really expressed his willing to keep supporting this university. So thank you very much. And now we would like to give you something, and I would like to invite the podium Dr. Khalid Abu Hamour. He is an assistant to the president to join us. We'd like to give you something so you can remember us and you can feel commitment to our university.